I got to do something. I can't do this anymore. And I told my partner, having spent years and years rationalising it to him, I said, I can't manage. And he was wonderful. He said, no, you can't, can you?
So, Christa, you've written extensively about your tenuous relationship with alcohol, drugs and food. And I'd love to know whether there was a particular moment that stands out where you realised that your relationship was starting to impinge on your quality of life.
So I think on a subconscious level, quite a long time ago. I mean, I remember my first alcoholic drink when I was 30 and I'd broken up with a boyfriend. And it upset me to my core. I couldn't believe it. I was just so outraged that he broke up with me. And I remember just being unable to get out of bed. And I remember, bless her, this is not my mother's fault, but she said to me, you know, it was kind of this feral sadness. How can this be happening to me? Waiting by the phone in case, you know, this person rang. My mother said, come on, pick yourself up the floor, have a drink. It'll make you feel better, okay? It was the middle of the day. It was a bottle of red wine on the kitchen counter. I was living with her at the time. And I thought this, you know, wasn't something I but I know she was trying to help me because, you know, mothers can't bear it when their children are in agony. So she wouldn't do anything to make me feel better. She said, have a big gulp of red wine and it will make things better just for the moment. And she was right. It did. Now, it's not as though I didn't drink alcohol before I did, but I sort of remember in my mind that there was a kind of click. There is a way of not feeling that dreadful feeling. And I was always very strict about it. Only, you know, 6:00 would I start. It was a way, because my primary problem, as is with a lot of women, I think, is food. It was also a way of keeping my appetite in check. I remember thinking to myself, I've just been dumped. I really don't know how to recover for this, but the one thing I don't want to do is eat on it, because that had always been my go-to. When I had a problem, I'd eat on it. And I found this other thing, this other crutch. And it was very powerful and it was very subtle and it was very acceptable. And I am, weirdly, a lot of people don't think of addicts as being disciplined. They're actually incredibly disciplined. That's maybe part of the problem. And I was very disciplined about this little crutch that I had and only allowing myself to do it at a certain time and measuring the bottle and everything. And it was always never more than just under half a bottle. And that sustained me for a while. And, you know, the thing about these crutches is they do work. But that was, sorry, and in answer to your question, I'm rambling. I'm so sorry. I do tend to ramble.
You're not at all.
That was when I was 30. So scroll forward. So I'd been this highly functioning, addict for a long time. It really worked. It worked. It got me out of the house. It made me less baity. When children came along, it really was a fantastic cutoff between baby time and grown-up time. So I kind of, you know, highly ritualized it. It allowed me a sort of sense of occasion. And, you know, when you have a baby, sort of, you know, days melt into another and sleep's all disturbed. And I needed a reason to feel somewhat celebratory about something. Because it was quite hard for me being an older mother and I found it quite difficult, the whole baby thing. So it really, really worked well, but it escalated. And I think the thing with things like drink and drugs is that they do escalate. They're sort of exponential. And what used to do very well for me, which started off, you know, sort of 2 to 3 hefty glasses of red wine, I'd need more. And the other sort of terrible thing really is it's never quite as good as it was in the beginning. So it's not, however much you drink, it's not doing what you want it to do. And in fact, weirdly, it does the opposite of what you want it to do. So you drink to lift yourself up, you suddenly find it's dragging you down. But by now, what I feel, I don't know if this is biologically true, chemically, it was doing exactly the opposite of what it was meant to do. But because it was in my system, I kept needing to do it. And that sounds very melodramatic. And on the outside, you wouldn't have probably noticed. Most people didn't. My partner did. There were certain friends who saw it get really messy. And the moment when I realized I can't manage anymore was New Year's Eve, 2014, I think.
So how long had it been going on for at that point?
So hang on, wait a minute. So I would say, 20, 25 years. It's a long time, isn't it? That's what's so insidious, actually, about it not being a fall-down drunk, because it can continue and continue without anyone noticing, without myself and being able to rationalize it to yourself. Anyway, by this time I had started, I took drugs as well. Again, I'd done those at college, but never as a sort of way of managing life. And that became a way of managing life too. You know, quick pep-me-up in the afternoon, a way to go out to dinner with people I didn't really want to go out to dinner with, family gatherings, all that sort of thing. It became sort of knitted into my life. And then, as I said, it was New Year's Eve on 2014. And I knew that I'd run out of my drugs. And I knew, because we weren't in London, that in order to get more, I'd have to drive 2.5 hours to get to them and to come back. And I also, by this time, there was a minimum order. So it was sort of a huge commitment for someone who was only going to do them for New Year's Eve and had promised herself she was going to stop for January. And I made this humongous decision. Okay, I'm not going to. I'm going to have a clean night. I'm going to stay and I'm going to let everybody else go out. I'm going to eat a healthy supper by myself in front of the TV and go to bed at 11:30. So of course it didn't end up like that. Because I didn't have any drugs, I ended up drinking a bottle of wine and half a bottle of toffee vodka, I remember, by myself, because everybody else had gone out. And I woke up the next morning and I remember standing by the Arga and sort of clutching. Oh, it sounds so white and middle class, doesn't it? The Arga. Anyway, clutching onto the Arga and thinking, I don't know how to put one foot in front of the other anymore, because I've become so dependent on medicating. And no one really knows. That was the awful other part of it. No one besides my partner really knew about it. So, you know, the awful thing was I knew I could sort of just limped along. And it was a sort of like minor epiphany. I just clutching on and thinking, okay, I've got to do something. I can't do this anymore. And so one of the ways that you can make something realer is telling another person. And I told my partner, having spent years and years rationalizing it to him and hiding stuff and, you know, going to great lengths to show him that I was perfectly fine and that, yeah, I fell over occasionally, but I was fine. I could manage. And I said, I can't manage. And he was wonderful. He said, no, you can't, can you? We got to do something about this. And from that day on, I never picked up again. I mean, I had to get help to do it, but it was the best thing I did, really. For me, not for everyone, but for me.
And that was your rock bottom, and it was
yes, kind of... and it's you know, compared to a lot of people's rock bottom, I certainly wasn't, you know, near death or anything, but it was a kind of existential rock bottom.
And so when did the drugs sort of start? Was that really to sustain your energy because you weren't eating and the eating disorder has sort of kicked in?
Yeah, it's that ghastly trifecta of food, drink and drugs. And, you know, you're juggling these three balls in order to maintain what?
Yeah,
you know, being able to get on the scales or being able to fit into a certain pair of jeans, which, you know, the older I get, and age is a fantastic thing, being able to realize that there is actually other ways of valuing the world and judging the world that you're in and seeing your place within the world and figuring out what you can give the world. There is more than looking thin or being a certain way or looking a certain way. But as I said, I think it's a function of someone being quite disciplined and needing boundaries. So I gave myself boundaries in which I could operate, and that sort of made me feel safe.
Yeah.
But of course, because I'm a human being and I have wants and needs, you're always spilling over those boundaries. So it's a reward, punishment. I don't know if that makes sense.
Makes total sense, because I think a lot of the issues when you are an addict or when you have an eating disorder is it's this lack of sense of deservingness. You sort of feel that in order to eat a meal, you need to have depleted yourself sufficiently throughout the day. And I remember coming back from work and getting to the top of the escalators in the tube and just feeling absolutely like I was about to pass out. But there was this little voice in me that was like, yes, that's exactly how we should feel. You go on. And then as you get older and as your recovery kicks in, I think that feeling starts to feel actually really uncomfortable. And you become quite fearful of that feeling of complete depletedness, or if you're an addict, that feeling of actually losing control, and then realizing that this sort of gilded cage you've created for yourself that sort of feels safe actually becomes incredibly unsafe, and you're desperate to kind of escape from it. And yet you just can't, you just kind of, without that extreme intervention, like you say, with, absolutely deciding that, right, New Year's Eve, 2014, I am stopping, that is it. And I think it's much easier with the drugs and the alcohol in some ways, because you can abstain completely. Whereas, as we know with food, it's something you have to confront daily.
I think the food thing is so hard. It's so hard because, as you say, we die without food. And I think more people have a problem around it than we know. Not just women either. And I'm quite. Sometimes I can't help looking at life rather reductively. What is this? What is this chasm that we all have? This inner chasm that needs to be filled by something. Because when you think about it, the food and the drugs and the drink, they're just, there's something, they're a substance. It doesn't really matter what substance it is. It could be anything. It could be work. It could be, I remember when I was in recovery, someone was telling me they had this thing about water. They had this addiction to, literally. I do think it can be anything, sex, whatever. But food is one of those things that's so tied up with comfort and mothers and safety before you can even talk, that primal feeling of safety. And I still am, quote unquote, neurotic about it, I suppose, but my God, has it gotten easier? And I've really had to work at it, but also realize that it's crazy to work towards a goal. There is no goal. Today is the goal. Now is the goal.
Yeah, because I think we're also always constantly trying to, it's like, oh yeah, well, tomorrow I'm going to have this epiphany, or later I'm saving up for later, or, next week, or, oh, I've planned that, trip in 6 months' time. So I've got, it's never, as you say, it's never in the here and now, and actually cherishing this moment here.
It's all we've got. It literally is all we've got. I remember I was interviewing someone. I can't remember the magazine I was interviewing. It was out in LA. She was a big music star in, I do know who it is. I'm not going to say who it is, in Malibu. And I remember her saying to me what she loved doing was going on a campaign to get thinner. So she'd give herself, when she was being shot for her latest video or whatever, I've got a month to lose 20 pounds. And I so related to that. You have a goal, and that's so exciting because you can make that everything. And it is really wishing your life away. And I'm 62 now, and it's taken me till now to realize you cannot. It is so unholy to live a life like that. But it's so entrenched as well. It's so entrenched in so many things. And when I say it's a daily struggle, I feel really guilty. This is not a struggle. We are two very lucky, privileged women. Many people have many worse struggles than we do. But it's a psychic struggle, which quite literally eats away at one. And, we're not giving as much as we can to the world, the more that we obsess about
Exactly, because you're kind
ourselves.
of...
When we're not looking out. It's all inwards. It's all this solipsistic, like looking inwards, and not taking in all the fabulous things around us.
Yeah, it's missing out on so much of life, really, and being present and having those moments and those memories.
Yeah, and not even, memories, but it's the present, like right now. How can I make the most of the right now?
That's so true. What I want to circle back on is how your eating disorder first manifested itself. And you've spoken about that being the sort of underlying issue.
Yeah, I mean, sounds sort of crass, but my, not crass, but kind of bludgeoning almost. But my parents split up when I was very, very young, 2, 3. And I was very close to my dad, but I was also very close to my mother. And I was very clingy with my mother, clingy with both of them. And I think I must have felt some kind of lack of safety around that from a very early age. But the way it first manifested, I, as a little girl, didn't eat anything but sweets, basically. Sugar was my real thing. I mean, it was such a drug for me from such an early age. And I have this memory of, I must have been about 7 or 8, and we lived in this flat, and we had one of these old-fashioned, it was an old doctor's, it was in Harley Street, and it was right at the top, this little flat, and it was one of those old-style sort of consulting rooms. And so we had a pantry, which is where they used to keep all the medicines, but obviously we used it as a pantry. And my mum used to keep the brown sugar on the 3rd or 4th shelf up, and I'd drag a chair over, and when I thought no one was around, and get a spoon out and just eat the sugar, the brown sugar, out of the the Tate and Lyle packets, and just stand there and eat it until I was sick. And it was, it was something secret. The secrecy is really exciting. And there's just the intense sweetness. And that I remember as being my first, wow, there is nothing in the world that is more comforting than this. Nothing. And then, of course, later I got sent away to school and I didn't want to go. And the only thing which comforted me was tuck, and that was my life.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
And I've never been a very good bulimic. So, in the sense that I could never, I was never very good at, getting sick. Of course, I tried over the years, but that didn't really work out. But always, and then when I went to college, in a different country, and I was very lonely, and, sugary food was the way that I comforted myself. And it really worked. So, of course, you can imagine when I found drink that it could replace it. I was like, wow, this is fantastic. But of course, I was just lurching from one medication to another.
I know, and it becomes like a friend. And then the thrill of knowing that you've got that sort of feast to go back to every day or whatever, it helps you get through the day. Because again, it's sort of like you're whiling away the hours in the anticipation that you're going to have this that like war. I totally relate to it.
And God forbid anyone should interrupt you.
I know. Which we have spoken about before. It's this thing of just wanting everyone to be sort of,
get out the house, please.
Exactly. And being incredibly bad-tempered if anyone interferes or
or needs to talk to you or the phone rings or whatever. It's a very kind of like onanistic thing. I mean, it's sort of the privacy of it all. I suppose it's a replacement for sex in a way. I mean, that's a whole other topic, but we're all seeking comfort in one way or another.
Absolutely.
And however we can get it.
And so, and with your sort of binging, was it always around the same sorts of food, or were you very particular? Did you go out and sort of buy specific food, or was it just everything and anything?
Well,
because it sounds like with you it would be quite planned.
Well, sort of. I mean, it was a sugar thing. I've always had this feeling, and I wonder if it's a generational thing. I wonder if it kind of like gets passed down, this of never having enough, not having enough, and like always the kind of mentality, there are only so many slices in a cake, basically. But that kind of like seeped out into the way I saw the rest of the world. I'm also quite an envious person. So if somebody else has success, well, that means that takes it away from me. It's been hard for me to get my head around the fact that you keep giving, just keep giving, and it'll come back. You don't have to worry. There isn't a finite amount of love, is basically what it's about. So that just this feeling of never, we're going to go out to dinner, and if I'm on a food thing, there's not going to be quite enough for me. I'm going to have to eat something when I go home. Or if it's an alcohol thing, watching the bottle like an eagle, how much has gone? How much am I going to get? What about when it comes to an end? Am I going to have had enough? Am I going to need more when I go home? So it just that feeling of not having enough is ever present, which again is a function of just not having that sense of self-security that I am enough. I am enough. I deserve this. I'm a human being. I deserve to be born. I have a right to be here, and I have a right to have a part of the world, whatever it is. And it's that slight technical hitch there with me, I think.
No, and I suffer from the same thing, and that for me it translates into hoarding.
Yes,
and overbuying and driving anyone I'm living with absolutely mad, because the fridge always has to be bursting full. And every time I go out to say get a pot of yogurt, I end up by buying 3 pots of yogurt, and then probably half the.
I mean, I was just thinking about that syndrome today. For example, I have a pair of shoes, which I suddenly, how come I haven't had these shoes before? They're so comfortable. They're not expensive. And the immediate thought that went through my mind is not, enjoy them. I need to get 4 more pairs. I need to get 4 more pairs and line them all up and have them there just in case.
This is in case of emergency, isn't it? It's like you have to prepare for every kind of eventuality.
And it's this fear, this primal fear that somehow anything I like is going to be taken away from me. Which, as I said, it's like a technical hitch that, and I can almost like talking about it with you, the fact that I'm aware of it is a good thing. I'm glad I can be aware of that, because it makes it less
scary in a way.
Scary, shameful, and less scary. Because I can. It's not my fault, I suppose.
No, it's
not.
It's just
it's what I was born with, and but there are things that I can do about it now that I know what the problem is.
Exactly, and it's kind of that thing of knowing that it's your chimp brain talking to you, saying, "Christa, you need to get 4 pairs of these shoes," versus actually, do I really need the 4 pairs? And I don't know whether this is the case with you, but I find if I don't then say buy the 4 tubs of yogurt and I buy 1, I walk out and I actually feel quite liberated and relieved. But in that moment of the decision of, I quite want to buy 4 actually, and like feeling that momentary comfort, but then I start to feel slightly uncomfortable because
unsafe.
Exactly. You kind of overstep the mark, and you kind of know you have deep down.
But it's this constant thing that I think that people like you and I have, which is always trying to true this line. But what line? What is this line that we feel we have to mark out with a great big indelible marker? And if we cross either side of it, we don't have to do that. It's okay. Our bodies will tell us. There is a kind of natural order to things. We don't have to keep carving out our identity all the time. We need to let go. And letting go is such a weighted thing to say. What does letting go? What does that mean? I can eat anything I want, whenever I want. Well, that's clearly not the case either. But that's me truing the line and go, I eat, and then I can punish myself, reward, punishment. It's a kind of circular, the monkey brain. But just being able to say that I have a monkey brain and to be able to look at that monkey brain makes me feel a hell of a lot better because I can see it for what it is.
And knowing that your thoughts are just thoughts,
They're just
they're
thoughts.
Not reality.
Feelings aren't facts.
I know we cannot, I think being in our category as people who suffer from any kind of addiction or an eating disorder, you cannot trust your feelings.
Yes, exactly. It's funny because you're so much younger than me and that you have, the wisdom to know that now is so fantastic because I didn't have that wisdom. I thought I was my feelings. I couldn't look beyond my feelings. Christa, was my feelings. And we're not. We're not. There is something essential and wonderful beneath that. I'm not sure what that is, and I don't think I'll ever find out. But it's something that's okay and deserves to be here.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. And Christa, how did you start your journey towards recovery? Because you said you've spoken about that moment in 2014, but had you sought help before that?
Oh, yeah. I've had a million therapists and I've tried I tried hypnosis and I went to a few recovery meetings and remember thinking, oh, not for me, not for me, not for me. But what I did is I checked myself into an outpatient recovery center. And I, perhaps because I had the privilege of being older and I didn't, I could afford to spend 6 months at home and never go out except for work. I sort of I made it a bit of I hate to say it, a goal, but I think it worked well for that particular project, shall I say, that I had, which was I have to not drink or do drugs for a discrete portion of time, as long as the recovery, the treatment lasted, which was 100 days. Was it 100 days? Yeah. So you had to go to, it was a 12 steps recovery program, and I had to go to something like, you have to go to 4 meetings a week. You have to, there are all these rules, and we love rules, don't we? So that was great, and that got me on the right road. And then I gradually went to less meetings. I started to get into the swing of it because, habits are a great thing. And I forced myself into good habits. I mean, we should never diss having habits and routines. We love our routines and rituals, but we can make them work for us.
Yeah, so true.
We really can. And it takes a bit of time, but it does become like brushing your teeth. And then, I don't know if anyone's listening to this and thinking, you know what, I really have to examine my drinking or whatever, my drugging. There does, I promise you, come a point where you don't even think about it. Not just that, but the idea of drinking, why would anyone need to drink? Why would you like even the taste of that? And you're perfectly fine, other people drinking. In fact, I rather like it when other people are having a good time. I suddenly realized part of the reason I drank and did drugs is because I wanted other people to have a good time around me too. It was about other people as well. And knowing that other people are having a good time, that now gets me off big time.
Yeah, no, I think it's such a good point that I think in today's day and age, it always really interests me why people associate not drinking with being boring. So it really frustrates me when I hear a friend saying, oh, well, I'm going to be really boring tonight, but I'm actually not going to drink, or apologizing.
Yes, me too. I mean, Christ, was I boring when I drank. I mean, my partner likes to remind me all the time, but I constantly repeated myself. I made inappropriate remarks. I hung around for too long. People are very, very boring when they're too drunk. And the other funny thing, I must tell you this, that when I was medicating, I was so frightened that I might say something wrong, or I might hiccup, or I might say something inappropriate, that I tended to be quite quiet when I went out because I was frightened of revealing that I was wasted. Now that I'm not, now that I have a clear head wherever I go and I feel the same in the morning as I do at night, I have much more confidence because it's more authentic, isn't it? Mm. This is me. And if you saw me tomorrow morning at breakfast, I'd be the same.
Yeah.
And that was a wonderful feeling. Spending time away with friends on weekends, not being the last person to get up in the morning, not coming down feeling like death, not having to apologize for God knows what. Oh my God, it was a wonderful, wonderful feeling.
Yeah, it's like you suddenly shed the skin and you're like suddenly Christa appears.
Free. You feel free.
It's a massive weight lifted off your shoulders.
Yeah.
But when you're in the midst of it, you cannot imagine.
Could not imagine it. I cannot tell you. I remember thinking, God, wouldn't it be great if you could just do this without having to medicate? And you get to 6:30 and think, I physically can't do this. How do people do this? How do people go to parties without having a drink or a line or both? I just don't understand and still have a good time. I mean, I white-knuckled a lot.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I mean, was there a sort of strategy of white-knuckling at the beginning of your recovery?
Yeah. But I enjoyed it because it was my project.
That was your goal.
I got to do this. You got to suck it up. You've got to do it. And eventually it became second nature. And it was the kindest thing I could do, not just for myself, but my family. I mean, we have to realize that when we have these addictions to these things, the fallout from that and the toxicity that we emanate, they feel it too.
Totally. And I was going to ask, I mean, how did your partner react and how did your sons react when you went on this journey towards recovery? Were they supportive?
Yes, they were. The kids were a bit young. I don't like to regret stuff, but I cannot help but feel regretful of how absent I was. Not physically, because I was a stay-at-home. Well, when I say stay-at-home, I was a freelancer, so I was always at home. But how emotionally and psychologically absent I was for the first years of their lives. I mean, right up until their teens. And I will never not regret that. And my partner, well, I mean, I feel so bad for partners. It's so awful for them because on the one hand, they want you to be medicated because you're nicer to them. But then on the other, they have this husk of a person that they're living with. It's the damage that in my case, it wreaked in my case.
Yeah. And I think relationships are a really interesting one because I think a lot of partners can't really cope when their partner goes on a recovery journey.
No.
Because suddenly, as you say, they're a sort of shell and then they suddenly blossom into this self-confident, self-accepting being. And, it's sort of the dynamic in the relationship really shifts in a major way.
It does. And I'm lucky because I have this incredible partner who is just always so supportive. And it's really great now the way we have a much better relationship as a result of it. Probably fight more though.
Yeah.
We'll definitely argue more. And, I'm not saying that everything's plain sailing. It's not. Life is just the same as it was before, but at least you're present and dealing with it. Which to me feels like a more honest way to live.
Totally. And I'm sure it's like an interaction on a much more balanced level because you're no longer the victim and the sort of playing almost like the child in the relationship.
Completely. I mean, if you have an addiction, it's quite easy for one's partner to infantilize you. You can't do anything. You can't open a brown paper envelope. Actually, I still can't do that. But, don't ask. It was like, don't ask me to do anything after 8:00 in the evening. Just don't, because I'm not going to be able to do anything. Don't ask me to do anything responsible or get on the phone and have to talk to anyone grown up. So it cut out a whole swathe of my life that he had to deal with. And, partners get used to that. And then when that's taken away and they don't have to look after you anymore, that's a change in a relationship. But in our case, I think it was a great change.
I think if you're in the right relationship, which you obviously were and are, then it's amazing. It can just absolutely blossom into the most beautiful thing.
Yeah.
But if you're in a slightly codependent relationship and the partner relies on being the sort of powerful one and exerting that power over the sort of the vulnerable victim, then
I mean, listen, where is there a relationship where there isn't a bit of codependence? And when you say a beautiful relationship, I don't know if it's a beautiful one, but it's one that works. And it's one, I keep saying this over and over again, it's one that feels authentic. And I think when you're always slightly wasted or wanting to get wasted. That's not authentic. You're in a different sphere.
So talk to me about your food when you were in the 12-step program. What happened with that?
Yeah, I mean, I talked about that ghastly trifecta. I mean, the drink and the drugs, it was easy to draw a line under those. But with food, that took much longer. And I remember with horror, I shouldn't say this. Well, I'm going to say it anyway. For that first year, I definitely put on half a stone or whatever it was. I mean, I tried not to get paranoid about it, but I couldn't help it. But, what can I say? And that was really hard at first. But then it was like almost flying a little bit when I realized, wait a minute, you don't have to medicate on something in order to feel okay. You can be comfortable with that bit of discomfort and you'll survive. And it was a subtle but kind of really important thing that one of many therapists I had, but I had one particular wonderful one who really worked with me on that of feeling comfortable with discomfort and knowing that feeling wasn't forever. And that was a really, really great, good life lesson, that it too shall pass. And I really worked with that. At first, I was all over the place when you ask about my food, but then I got into a kind of rhythm, and I know now what suits my body. I know that if I just eat toast all day, bread goes straight to my eyelids. It's just what it is. That's the way it feels. Now, that's not me being Rexy. That's me realizing, you have your toast for breakfast and that feels great. And you have your coffee and your cup of tea. And then it's okay not to eat until lunch because feeling a bit hungry, you're going to survive. You're going to be fine. And then having some lunch and then knowing that lunch comes to an end, you're going to be okay. Etc., etc., etc. And trusting that it will be okay. You're going to be all right. And I'm always grabbing for something. I always sometimes think someone once said to me in recovery, addiction is about being compelled to change the way you feel at all times. And it's a bit like that. I've always got the desire to feel slightly better than I already do. I just have a little bit more. And just to be aware of that. And knowing that, you can eat like a normal, healthy person and have the bad things and wake up feeling like you've overeaten, but it's not the end of the world. You can, it's amazing actually how, you can recover from those destructive feelings after, very soon. You can wake up feeling, we all know what a food hangover feels like, but, the day goes on and you'll feel better.
Yeah, and I think it's normalizing it. Sometimes I say to myself, okay, I might have overdone it yesterday, but how many people in the world indulge, on a birthday or on a holiday or whatever it is? And actually, it's normal to feel a bit like groggy the next morning. But instead of trying to control that groggy feeling and to try and, like you say, you self-medicate your feelings almost because you want to feel a certain way, it's actually just being like, okay, I feel a bit groggy. That's okay. Sitting with it. And as you say, this too shall pass. It sort of just moves on. Instead of which, if you go then into the addiction, then that's when it really starts to snowball and spiral.
Yes. And also, I think another helpful tip for me and another thing that I learned in recovery, and by the way, not everyone recovers doing 12 steps. There are all sorts of different ways to do it. I just happened to pick this one, and the 12 steps program suited me, but it doesn't suit everyone. What was I going to say? Oh, I forgot what I was going to say. The other thing, no, I've lost what I was going to say, but it was some incredibly helpful tip, and now I've forgotten. Well, anyway.
No, we're talking about emotional regulation and things snowballing. And trying to kind of control the way you feel with
trying to control
the grogginess.
Yeah, Also knowing that, and this is what grown-ups tell you all the time, but it's the truth. Nobody's really looking. Nobody's really looking. If you feel heavier, that doesn't have to colour your whole day. Don't look through the prism of that. You don't have to. You're the only one who's looking at life through that prism. Also stuff like there shouldn't, I had in my cupboard my thin clothes and my fat clothes, and that was just a way of punishing myself. That's not what I bring to the table, being a certain weight. It really isn't. I mean, who do I think I am? It's not like, I'm a model whose income depends on her weight. It's not relevant to what I do. And it doesn't, the fact that, my jeans are looser isn't going to make me more valuable to the people around me. And yet I do, there's always that little seed. I mean, I suppose I forgot to say one other thing, which is probably quite formative. And I don't blame him one tiny bit, because this is the way he was brought up. But my father was very fattest. He was very, very fattest. And he was terrified that his beloved daughter, I was the eldest, and he sort of pinned all his hopes on me, really. He was an immigrant from India, and he had all these hopes about his British daughter. He was terrified that I'd become dumpy. And he made that very clear from a very early age. All children, or most children, go through puppy fat. I did. But to him, it was like this was going to be forever. And a lot of my childhood, because we used to go on summer holidays with my dad, is coloured by having to eat in secret. Like going on holiday to places. He used to take us to these fabulous places, but then having to take food into the loo so he wouldn't see me eat, because I was only allowed to eat certain things in front of him. And that obviously had an effect. As I said, it's not his fault, but it felt like his love was conditional.
Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of us with eating disorders struggle with, is the idea that if you get better and if you are like quote unquote a healthy normal weight, I mean, what is normal, but a healthy weight, then you're losing some identity that you've attached yourself to for so long. And as you say, actually, no one notices. Like if I fill out my pair of jeans, or if they're baggy, you actually bring more to the table if you fill out the jeans and you're feeling slightly more settled and less frantic. And
do you also think, though, Pandora, I was thinking about this, do you think that if people say to you, gosh, you look healthy, you're like, shit, I'm normal, I'm average, and we're terrified of being average,
100%.
of being invisible. We have to define ourselves somehow, because inside we can't define ourselves, so we must define ourselves by something on the outside. And so we happen to have chosen that.
Oh, 100%. And I like, unfortunately, it is that thing of being okay with being normal and just like being on the middle road and like not going from 0 to 100. It's like, okay, I've got to either train like an Olympic athlete or I'll lose this kind of entirely. And as you said, it's like using our routine and our focus to serve us. And it's incredible the discipline that we have. But for so long, it can be so dysfunctional. And you sort of thrive off the feeling that you're slightly pushing yourself to the edge.
Yes.
And actually suddenly just being able to be present and actually feeling a bit settled and being, as you said, it's like that sort of slight feeling of comfort in the discomfort, because knowing that the discomfort is a good thing, because if you're feeling discomfort, you're kind of doing something right.
Absolutely. That thing you said about you only really feel alive when you're pushing yourself to the edge. Oh my God, I so relate to that. You feel you only exist at that sort of vibration that's a little dangerous. And what's that about? It's like we're constantly trying to prove to ourselves we're alive or something.
Yeah.
As though, if we don't push ourselves to the edge, we might sort of disappear into little pieces and like not exist. I really do. I do believe it's a kind of existential thing. I know some people think that I talk claptrap, but I know in my heart that's what it's about for
No,
me.
I agree. I mean, I think a lot of the extremism is about feeling that danger and trying to feel alive, because you have to push yourself to that edge. You're kind of almost so numbed out to every other feeling in your body that actually when you get to that real danger zone, you're suddenly like, whoa, okay, as you say, I'm here, I'm alive, I'm present. And for so much of life, I've lived in my head and the rumination and the thoughts, whereas that adrenaline that comes from really pushing yourself to that point.
It's like that's what we feel is real. That's what life is. But I don't think life is. I think there's a real beauty in not boring, but, sometimes I think about this analogy, and this makes me feel a bit better about the idea of being in the middle and balanced and average. Is, when you're skiing, I'm a terrible skier. I'm terrified of skiing. But, you've got to find the exact middle to get it right. And that middle, there's nothing average about that. Or another friend I have was telling me, like, a boat, like trying to find the middle ground in order to go forward. There's a kind of, I want to say geographical, but kind of like a biological, the need to be balanced. You don't have to go to the edges to be alive.
Yeah.
In fact, you shouldn't.
No, but health is balance, right? I mean, that's what we're all seeking, is this awful word, moderation.
Moderation, balance. They've really frightened me, those words. But it's what it is.
I know.
And I can't believe I only really know this in my 7th decade, because a lot of getting clean, those 7 years that I've been clean have been about, certainly the first 2 years faking it to make it. It only for me started becoming part of my DNA, as it were, after about 2 years.
And how have your friends been? Do you feel like you've culled a lot of your old friends, or have they sort of been very supportive on the journey?
Most people have been wonderful. I did have certain friends who I caned it with. And for a year, I just couldn't see those people. They were just too triggering. And I felt so nostalgic. And what have I left behind? It was like a real love affair. No more, hearing the birdies tweet at 5 a.m. type of thing. No more. And for, good year, I couldn't see them. I see them now. And, when it gets to be midnight, I've had my tea and everyone's getting a bit messy. I kind of do want to go home. But you kind of, you arrange your life around it. Like my partner is one of those people who's not a heavy drinker at all, but he'll stay till the bitter end. But I need to know that I've got transport there to take me home earlier. And we have an arrangement. It's okay that I leave earlier. And I also can't bear standing around at cocktail parties. I just kind of like, can we just eat? So I can get a bit impatient about stuff like that, but I'm working on it.
And do you have any daily habits now that you sort of implement that help you to feel grounded and present? Or is therapy ongoing? Do you still attend?
No, interesting. Somebody else asked me that. I don't have any therapy, but I'm reading this wonderful book called The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer, which for me, not for everyone, is really helpful in centering me. And then I've learned other things which kind of, I need to eat regularly and healthily. And I need to kind of watch that. And sometimes that means not eating what everybody else is eating, but it's okay. I take a freezing shower every morning, and that is become a really crucial part of my day. And I know that sounds a bit mad, but it sets me up. It's very important to set myself up right when I get up in the morning. I don't write a little gratitude list in the morning, but I say it to myself, and we both say it to each other. We have so much to be thankful, and then we list the things. Because, mornings can be a bit creepy, you feel very vulnerable in the mornings.
Yeah, I agree.
Bad things happen all the time, but I feel like I'm better equipped to deal with them with a clear head. But bad things do happen. Oh my God, they happen. But, if you talk to me, if we'd been talking 8 years ago, well, I wouldn't have even turned up to this, would I? But yeah, I'm much less flaky. And another thing is I like to be comfortable in what I wear. I mean, I used to work for I worked for a fashion magazine for quite a long time. I'm not in fashion, but I worked for a fashion magazine. And clothes were terribly, terribly, terribly important. And although they are still important, I have to be comfortable because there is nothing less fashionable than looking uncomfortable. And I spent sort of a lifetime feeling uncomfortable, too high shoes, too tight clothes or whatever. And comfort, real comfort, that's super elegant, I think. So that's become a very important thing.
And nighttime rituals, what's your sort of go-to now?
Okay, God, you really want to know? Okay, I'll tell you. So I have this little dessert I make for myself so that I don't, and obviously you can't do that with your people's houses, but I have this like little frozen yogurt thing that I make for myself, which everybody else thinks it's disgusting. It's made of coconut milk and agave and Greek yogurt, and freeze them in the fridge, take up all the space in the fridge. My partner goes nuts. But it takes a long time to eat, and it's a way of, because I often don't recognize that I'm sated for about half an hour. I'm still hungry when I'm not really hungry. I just think I am. So it's a good way of, I just eat it very slowly while watching TV, and it sort of settles me. That's not always available though. I do the crossword. I do Wordle, I do Quordle, and I do something on the New York Times called Spelling Bee, because reading tends to keep my mind, and they are very much rituals, and they definitely help me sleep. And bed is a wonderful. I love being able to sleep. I didn't realize until I got sober how well you sleep when you don't drink, and when I overeat. Because, I do sometimes. And, there are the occasional horrible binge pops up now and then. And
which it does.
I'm sorry, but it does. Yeah. Just less frequently. Or indeed, if I haven't eaten enough. That's a horrible way to go to bed. And you sleep badly and you feel it. You feel it.
Yeah, I know that food hangover, as we were saying. It's not a good feeling.
And so, but I become much more sort of like, I know that that's the way I'm going to feel. Okay, Christa, if you're okay with that, feeling shitty like that in the morning, then go right ahead. But just know it's not going to change. It's not going to be a different feeling. That's the way it's going to feel. Yeah, and it will colour the whole day. Just know it. And so I've introduced a certain sanity into my life.
And I think it slowly just becomes less important and less frequent. And it's being okay with those days when you might overeat and trying to, if you do have a binge, it's actually, as you say, it's not expecting to have an epiphany off that binge and to be sort of left feeling euphoric, because we seek that comfort still and that safety, which I think when you get to a certain point in your recovery, it actually ceases to give you. And you sort of slightly dread it, but the thrill of sort of doing it is still there.
The thrill. Oh, you lock the doors, fill the fridge, get out everyone. No, I still have that. But it's less, I know what it is now.
Yeah.
I know what it is. And I know what it takes to make me feel sane. And, I screw up, but
like we all do, you fall over, but I think particularly with the food, I think with the drugs and alcohol, obviously relapse is more serious, but I think when it comes to food, it can't be perfect 100% of the time. It just doesn't. Perfection just doesn't.
And it's also kind of a nice reminder that you're human and your body gets hungry and it craves things, and it's sort of sweet, and it's okay. And also another thing I think that we mustn't underestimate is how everybody in the world comfort eats. To a certain degree. I mean, I know when I'm craving like a lemon fairy cake or whatever it happens to be, piece of Battenberg, it's not actually that I want, it's the feelings that were associated with it. And I know that. And sometimes just a lovely hot cup of tea will do the trick.
Yeah.
And and you don't need, you don't need the other stuff. Not always. Sometimes it's really great to, eat the piece of cake as well. But just, I know how sugar is very triggering for me. Very triggering.
Yeah, no, and I know some programs advocates of eliminating it entirely, but it's it's tricky for other people, and it's just like you said, it's just navigating your own sea, and actually,
and it's about, again, big cliche. It's about the journey, not the goal, and the journey is great. I'm really trying to be on that slow journey.
Well, Christa, you've been absolutely fantastic, and I really appreciate you being so open and sharing your story, because it's an incredibly powerful story, and I'm a huge fan of all your writing. Whenever I see this name Christa D'Souza appear in an article, I'm like, yes, right, got to read this one. So save it up, like in my hoarding way. So
more of that, please. I love that.
No, you've been brilliant, and really, you're so brave and courageous. So thank you for helping so many other people with your story.
Thank you.
Pleasure.